Imagine having to flash your ID every time you access adult content online. Would that feel like common sense or censorship? In a groundbreaking decision, the Supreme Court recently upheld a controversial Texas law requiring strict age verification for pornographic websites. But what does this really mean for your free speech and privacy online? Are we headed for a safer digital world for children? Or have we opened the door to unprecedented government oversight? Today, we'll break down the court's decision in Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton and explain why it matters to you. You'll hear both sides of the debate. Is this simply like showing an ID at a bar or the movies? Or are your digital rights now on thin ice? Justice Thomas wrote the majority opinion and framed the law as a legitimate exercise of the state's power to protect children, with only a modest burden on adults. In the court's view, the power to require age verification is within a state's authority to prevent children from accessing sexually explicit content. Requiring an ID check does not directly censor any speech for adults. It is only an incidental effect on protected speech, Thomas wrote. The majority concluded the law is constitutional. It serves an important interest in shielding kids from harm, and it uses plainly legitimate methods that don't restrict substantially more speech than necessary. In short, the court saw Texas's age checks as reasonable, modern updates to long-standing practices, like showing ID to buy alcohol, to vote in some states, or attend R-rated movies. The court's 3 liberal justices had another opinion. Justice Elena Kagan, joined by Justices Sotomayor and Jackson, argued that the Texas law should have been subject to strict scrutiny, the toughest judicial review for laws regulating speech. Kagan pointed out that the law indisputably burdens adults' access to legal content based on the content's nature. Under normal First Amendment doctrine, any content-based law is subject to tough judicial review. The dissenters worried that Texas's approach, while aiming to shield minors, directly impedes adults from viewing constitutionally protected material unless they submit to an ID check. This really touches on a core tension between protecting children and preserving free expression and privacy. Supporters of the law, including Texas officials, argue that porn is too accessible and damaging to kids. They view age verification as a common-sense barrier. If a website's content is adult-only, then an adult user should be willing to prove their age, just as they would at a store or a movie theater. What's the big deal about a quick ID check if it might prevent a child from stumbling onto hardcore content? Think about how freely you've browsed the internet your whole life. Now, imagine suddenly having to upload your ID before accessing certain sites. Would that stop you in your tracks? Privacy advocates say this isn't about protecting kids, it's about your right to explore the web without the government watching over your shoulder. Requiring ID could deter many adults from accessing perfectly legal, non-obscene material due to fear of being tracked or judged. Civil liberties groups argue that forcing people to identify themselves before viewing legal erotica is a serious chill on anonymous free expression. After all, who wants Captain Clipboard, your local bureaucrat, nosing in on what you view online? The law's opponents say it effectively conditions adults' access to speech on giving up their privacy. That leads to an odd result. Without an ID, you're stuck with internet content that's been sanitized for a teenage audience. This evokes a long-standing principle that government should not reduce the adult population to reading or watching only what is suitable for kids. Doubts about effectiveness make the law contentious as well. Opponents argue tech-savvy minors will easily evade these restrictions, for example, by using VPNs to visit sites from non-Texas locations, or simply finding adult content on platforms that aren't age-gated. Some major adult sites responded to laws like this by blocking access in Texas altogether. But blocking known sites might drive determined teens to smaller, more dangerous corners of the internet that don't bother with any protection. This whack-a-mole problem, where restricted users just move to platforms with fewer scruples, leads some to doubt that the law will truly shield any kids. It's important to acknowledge why many people believe the Texas approach has merit. Protecting kids from pornography and explicit sexual content is something most of the public really likes. The internet today is a very different place than it was 2 decades ago. Hardcore content is just a few clicks away on a smartphone, and parents often feel outmatched by the sheer volume of explicit material online. Lawmakers point to research and alarming anecdotes about porn addiction among youth, or the damaging effects on the mental health and development when kids consume extreme content at a young age. In the majority's eyes, the requirement to verify age is a minor hurdle. Once you prove you're 18, the states allow you full access to the content in question. Justice Thomas likened it to a traditional age gate. For example, websites asking for your birth date or requiring a credit card for verification, which have existed for years. Proponents say this strikes the right balance. Kids get stopped at the door while adults, after a quick ID check, can go on with their business. Skepticism about the law's validity runs deep. One major concern is the precedent it sets for speech regulation going forward. Requiring age verification for adult content sounds narrow, but defining sexual material harmful to minors can be tricky, to put it mildly. What if a site has educational material about sexual health? Could that be swept in by overzealous enforcers? Opponents warn that a broad interpretation might lead to over-censorship, where sites hosting perfectly lawful content for adults err on the side of caution and restrict access or water down their material. There's also the slippery slope fear. Today, it's porn sites. Tomorrow, it could be violent content or extremist political or artistic content deemed harmful to minors. Another fundamental objection is the burden on adult users. The First Amendment doesn't just protect speech in the abstract, it protects our right to receive information and ideas anonymously. As the ACLU argued in this case, having to show your papers at a digital doorway can deter adults from accessing lawful content due to embarrassment or fear of repercussions. Consider this scenario. You're researching sexual and medical information online, and suddenly a pop-up demands your ID before you proceed. Would you hesitate, wondering who might track that sensitive search? Opponents fear this ruling opens the door to exactly that scenario. Ordinary adults forced to sacrifice anonymity just to get information. The chilling effect is real. People might self-censor their online reading and viewing choices if they know they're being verified and potentially logged. It's also argued that the law might be ineffective or even counterproductive at protecting kids. As mentioned, children determined to find adult content will likely route around the restrictions. Meanwhile, responsible adult sites that comply with the law might lose traffic or face business hits, while the sketchier corners of the web that ignore the laws entirely could end up attracting more youth to their websites. Will the law simply create more black markets for porn? Might it also create new markets for fake IDs? For many, this is a rollback of digital free speech rights. For over 2 decades, courts struck down laws that tried to shield minors by broadly restricting online content. The 1997 Communications Decency Act's indecency provisions and the 1998 Child Online Protection Act were both held unconstitutional. In fact, the Supreme Court in 2004 explicitly struck down a federal law very similar to Texas's, one that required commercial websites to verify age or face penalties for allowing minors access. Back then, the court reasoned that such measures were not the least restrictive means. Filtering software was seen as a preferable, less intrusive alternative. The court also reasoned that these laws reduced the adult population to only what is fit for children, a result the First Amendment does not permit. So, back in the mid-1990s, Congress passed the Communications Decency Act, which, among other things, made it a crime to send or display indecent material online in a way accessible to minors. The Supreme Court struck that down in 1997 in a landmark case, Reno v. ACLU, for violating free speech provisions. There, the court refused to let the government turn the internet into a zone safe only for children at the cost of adult users' rights. A year later, Congress tried a more tailored approach with the Child Online Protection Act, requiring commercial adult websites to verify users' age or face penalties. That too was blocked by the courts. In 2004, the Supreme Court upheld an injunction against the law. The reasoning was that voluntary filters and parental controls were less restrictive alternatives, and the law was not narrowly tailored. Those earlier decisions established a strong precedent that broad age verification or indecency laws online ran afoul of the First Amendment. So what changed in 2025? This case gave the court an opportunity to revisit this issue in a new context. Texas argued that the 2004 precedent should be overruled or reinterpreted because the internet of today is not the internet of 2004. They noted that 2 decades of technological change have made online porn vastly more ubiquitous and accessible, and that age verification techniques have improved. The Supreme Court's majority in upholding Texas's law did distinguish the earlier cases. The key difference they cited is scope. Unlike past laws that blanket banned indecent content to everyone or punish sites for any minor accessing material, the Texas law builds the age check into the process and doesn't criminalize content itself. The majority stressed that earlier statutes were struck down because they effectively prevented adults from seeing the content at all. Texas's law just put up a safety gate for minors. They called it a digital adaptation of long-standing protections for children, implying it's more like carding someone at a bar than outright prohibition. Even so, this is a significant shift in First Amendment jurisprudence for online speech. The immediate fallout is that Texas can enforce its age verification law, and other states are likely to follow suit. In fact, this ruling may have a domino effect. Nearly half of U.S. states have enacted or considering similar laws. Expect to see more states rolling out age verification mandates for adult content websites in the coming months in different varieties of strictness. And of course, expect ensuing litigation. Another wrinkle is how this ruling might apply to other online content beyond pornography. It's interesting because the law is defined by what is considered harmful to minors, but future legislation might extend age gates to violent content or to content related to substances. The Supreme Court's rationale that keeping minors away from certain content is within state power, as long as adults can still technically access it, could invite experimentation. It's not hard to imagine a state requiring age verification to access websites about gambling, recreational marijuana, under the logic of protect the kids. While that's speculative, the precedent set here blurs the line and will surely be tested in courts in coming years. Social media platforms might also come under the microscope. The Texas law exempted large platforms unless a third or more of their content was sexual. But what if states try to require age verification for social media use altogether? We've seen that fail in other contexts, but states might lean on this new angle to try social media gates for minors again. Paxton is highly significant and an interesting opinion. It tips the balance slightly toward online regulation and away from the absolute free-for-all approach of the early internet days. For parents and child safety advocates, it's a welcome tool, a tangible effort to help navigate the wild west of online pornography. For free speech advocates and many ordinary adults, it sets a worrisome precedent that could make the internet feel less free and less private. In our increasingly digital lives, the question lingers. Will age gates and ID checks become as normal as spam filters? Or will they spark a backlash as people realize the trade-offs involved? This ruling suggests a new path forward, but with plenty of skepticism along the way. One thing's for sure. As states press ahead with similar laws and critics watch keenly, the debate over how to keep the internet safe for kids without undermining adult liberties, it's far from over. I'm Benjamin Barr, and I want to thank you for spending time with me today. My job as a constitutional litigator is to provide you the tools necessary to resolve today's constitutional controversies. I'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to subscribe and like on the channel. It really helps our efforts. And join us next week as we examine yet another constitutional controversy.